Hey everybody, this is Carlos Velez with Lacerta Bio in New York, bringing you our annual Year in Review 2022 edition. So, what did we find interesting in 2022? Well, a couple of things. First of all, we'll start with drug approvals. FDA, at least from recent history, has had a bit of a down year in 2022. About 35 some odd approvals before the year ends. Take a look at the link there. It's always an interesting exercise to look to see what's been approved. You don't often hear about a lot of the drugs that are approved, but there's the list. Three of the ones that caught our attention were, first of all, Mounjaro, which is a bispecific to improve glycemic control. It's an interesting one because patients who are on Mounjaro actually have the potential to lose quite a bit of weight. And I've heard stories of patients who are on Mounjaro, not necessarily because they have a type 2 diabetes diagnosis, but because they're obese and they want to lose weight, and so they're using Mounjaro for weight loss. Now, the insurance companies have obviously caught wind of this. They're now requiring pre-approvals. They have to have an official diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. So, I don't think this is something that's going to last very long. Nevertheless, word has gone out that if you're on Mounjaro, you can expect to lose potentially quite a bit of weight. Somebody told me actually that there are some shortages of Mounjaro for diabetics because a lot of patients are using this again sort of off-label. But again, I don't think that's going to last very long. The insurance companies are much too sharp to let that go for very long. Next, we have an ophthalmology approved product, another prostaglandin agonist from Santen. I haven't looked at this product very carefully. I don't know exactly what the advantages are here versus some of the other drugs that are out there to reduce elevated IOP, but I'll certainly take a look at that. And the third one is a brand called Tzield, which is anti-CD3, which is indicated to delay stage 3 type 1 diabetes. Now, this caught my eye because it's tremendously challenging, and speaking in general terms, it's really challenging to demonstrate delayed disease progression. So I'm definitely going to want to go back and take a look at this label to see exactly, how they were able to do that. You'll notice this is from a company called Provention. No, I've never heard of them either. So again, I think it's worthwhile taking a closer look at those. But this kind of points me towards a thought that I've had for several years now, which is that we as an industry continue to develop more and more expensive, more and more complex therapies that actually treat fewer and fewer patients. Now, I know I'm contradicting myself because in the previous slide I talked about 2 new products to treat diabetes and glaucoma, but nevertheless, if you look at the list, we're continuing to focus on oncology, rare disease, etc. Now, there's nothing wrong with developing drugs to treat a rare disease, don't get me wrong, and there are good reasons for that, and investors are following suit, and I'll show you some data in a moment. But my concern is that all this innovation comes at an expense, and the expense is the lack of innovation in a lot of areas where there is little new innovation and a tremendous amount of prevalence. Again, I'll show you some data in a moment. But you see here, this is data from JP Morgan. This is for cell and gene therapy on the top. This is by therapeutic area and by modality. Again, this is nothing new. There's lots of interest in these modalities and these therapeutic areas. Moving forward, I frankly don't see this changing to any significant degree. As long as pricing and so forth is favorable, this will probably continue for the foreseeable future, which it's fortunate for some, but unfortunate for others. If you are interested in this JP Morgan report, the link is there. This is as of Q3. They will have one for Q4, probably sometime in early January, in conjunction with their annual conference in San Francisco. The next topic, drug shortages. Now, I have to admit, this is a topic that I've heard about. I've talked to a few people about it over the past few years, but I've never really looked into it, and I'm certainly not an expert in this at all, but I did look at the FDA website, or this page, where the FDA tracks drug shortages, and it's actually kind of interesting. There are about 120 of them as of the middle of December. It seems to cut across multiple therapeutic areas. Some antibiotics, some are surprising, like there's a shortage of epinephrine auto-injectors. Some opioids are in short supply. Just by eyeballing it, it looks like the majority of the shortages are parenteral. Now, we have had, at least in the U.S., some issues with parenteral manufacturing capacity. I don't know if that's part of the problem here. Again, I'm not an expert in this, but I would like to take a look at this a little bit more carefully. I'm not sure what we as a sort of collective industry can do, but the shortages are there. And if you click through one of the drugs on the shortage list, you're taken to a page that looks like this, where it lists various manufacturers of that finished dosage form. And it also tells you what is being reported to the FDA in terms of why there's a shortage. So this is an example. This is for one drug to treat a variety of leukemias. Different manufacturers are saying that there's a shortage because there's a shortage of the API, there's unexpected increased demand. In some cases, some manufacturers have discontinued production entirely, presumably for economic reasons, but it could also be because of API shortages or some other reason. So, why are there shortages in general? Again, there could be any number of reasons. One of them that is not directly captured on that page is this fourth bullet point here, which is the presence of viable substitutes. We're an industry that lives and breathes innovation, and so if we're innovating new products and we're shelving or no longer using some of the older products, there's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of how things should work. But nevertheless, it brings to question, why some of these, shortages are taking place. I do see on the list a number of companies that have just discontinued manufacturing for unstated reasons. There may be other reasons. I don't entirely know. I actually brought this issue up with a pharmacist who made an interesting comment. He said, if you have a child with a fever and an upper respiratory tract infection, you may have a big problem. And what he meant by that was that not only is there currently a shortage of certain antibiotics to treat upper respiratory tract infections in children, but there are also shortages in children's acetaminophen, for example. So, it's not a theoretical concern. It is a real problem that could be affecting any number of populations, whether it's pediatrics, oncology, and so forth. So, this is something that if I have some time in the coming months, I'd like to take a closer look at, just to see again if there's some sort of business model or some other opportunity to help address this problem. Next, financial markets. Yeah, it's been a down year. There's no question about it. Biotech is down. But hey, so is nearly everything else this year. Biotech has recovered somewhat. It was down, 40-ish% earlier this year. It's only down, 15-16%. Not all stocks are down. The oil stocks are performing well. Thank you, BP and Total, for salvaging my personal portfolio. Thank you very much. I think a lot of the reasons, we don't have to spend a lot of time talking about that here. I think they're fairly well known. It's COVID-induced inflation, European wars, supply issues, et cetera, et cetera. What's going to happen in the broader markets beginning next year? If you want to take a guess, go right on ahead. I think from an industry point of view, one of the things that we've been noticing, and I'll show you more data in the next few slides, is the idea that we have seen a lot of capital flow into biopharma in the 19, 20, 21 timeframe, and a lot of that money has been deployed, and there's not a lot of money left for new investments in 2022. But the more concerning bit is the idea that now that a lot of companies were financed in this 19, 20, 21 timeframe, it's therefore unlikely that there will be enough capital to support follow-on rounds for companies that were capitalized or financed during this time period. So we're in a situation now where we see a lot of companies that are going to be undercapitalized, looking for money at declining valuations while patent clocks are ticking. So, if you work for a company with a strong balance sheet, it's a buyer's market, perhaps more than ever. It's a great opportunity if you have the capital to go out there and find some interesting assets. Unfortunately, what this also means is that we may see some really good drug candidates that are shelved and just never see the light of day, which is really, really unfortunate. Now, that's some data from Biomed Tracker. This is some data from JP Morgan. Again, you can see very clearly there's this large quantum, this wall of cash that entered biopharma, in the 18, 19, 20 time frame. It was all deployed, and so now you're seeing less venture financing. So that's sort of how it's supposed to work. But interestingly, if you look at the R&D partnerships, that blue line, companies are holding on to cash. There aren't as many partnerships taking place as there were a few years ago, and so part of that is caution. Part of that is looking for valuations to drop. Part of that is looking for some technologies to mature. It is somewhat interesting that you're seeing an uptick in academic research and licensing. I don't know exactly what that means, but it's certainly something I'd like to keep an eye on moving forward. From that same report, they're also reporting venture totals. Again, there's a lot of capital raised in 19, 20, and it was rapidly deployed. I think what's going to happen moving forward is we're going to see essentially a reversion to the mean. We're going to see moving forward, 7, 8, 9 billion, roughly per quarter, invested in biopharma. And look, that's not a bad number. Yes, it would be nice to be in the 20s like we were last year. The chances are that's just simply not going to happen again anytime soon. And look, a lot of the innovations that we're seeing today are based on investments that were made, 15, 16, 17, 18 time frame. So, reversion to the mean is not such a bad thing from our industry's point of view. So I think the bubble is over. I think we're going to go back to the way things used to be, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Next, artificial intelligence. So I've been looking at artificial intelligence for a variety of reasons. We have an AI consulting project right now. We're advising a company. It's been looking at it for a number of reasons. And I started to think about falling productivity in our industry. Now, this is an old story. This is some data actually that was published. The article's from 2011, but the data set goes back to 1990. Gosh, that's a long time. That's a long time ago. And if you look at the data set in this particular paper, they tracked attrition rates between 1990 and 2004. And attrition rates in their database were climbing. So more and more drugs were failing in preclinical, more and more drugs were failing in phase 1, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we as an industry were failing more often over time. So we were becoming less efficient in our ability to produce products. And so as I started to think about this historically, I started to think about what were some of the approaches that we as an industry took to address this falling productivity problem. We started outsourcing, for example. We started outsourcing to Asia and Central and Eastern Europe in an attempt to lower costs and lower the corresponding risk. Remember Lab on a Chip, Organ on a Chip? Some of those technologies are still around. There are some consultants who said that pharma should exit therapeutic areas and should focus on, shall we say, quote-unquote, easier therapeutic areas or quote-unquote easier indications. For a while, we were all talking about sort of lean organizations, doing more with less, et cetera, et cetera. More recently, there's been some thought suggesting that some of the new modalities, like antisense and CRISPR and so forth, are inherently lower risk, and therefore they could help in addressing the overall productivity problem. A lot of these ideas, concepts, there's nothing wrong with them. They have worked to some degree, I would argue. But I frankly don't see anything that has the potential to really, really address this problem, except for artificial intelligence. Now, this is a slide from an investor presentation from Exscientia, who is arguably one of the leading companies in the artificial intelligence space. And it's a nice presentation. There's a lot of interesting data in there. But the thing about artificial intelligence from a drug discovery point of view, it's remarkable what you can do with this approach. You without getting into the technical details, which frankly I don't understand. I'm not a computational chemist. But regardless, let's just look at the results. When you apply artificial intelligence to drug discovery, you wind up with fewer compounds to get to an optimized candidate. In other words, companies are no longer, with the use of artificial intelligence, you're no longer synthesizing, in some cases, tens of thousands of candidates in order to get to an optimized candidate. Now you're doing that in the hundreds of compounds in order to get to an optimized candidate, which means faster time to filing patents. Not only are you synthesizing fewer optimized candidates, you're synthesizing safer, more specific candidates on paper, not literally on paper, of course, before the synthesis begins. Before the synthesis begins, you have a list of compounds to make that are already bound to be safer and more specific than you could have done if you didn't have artificial intelligence in the first place. All this means faster time and lower cost in the IND, which in turn is a higher probability of success. It could also mean better clinical trial results. Now, this is all well and good from let's say, let's call it from target discovery all the way through completion of IND. No question that the benefits of artificial intelligence are tremendous when it comes to that piece of drug discovery. Now, where I think AI can really, really make a dent in our industry's ability to discover and develop novel drugs is if artificial intelligence were used to dramatically reduce clinical development costs, especially in areas abandoned by our industry. So imagine if you can use artificial intelligence not only to accelerate clinical trials in terms of fastering recruitment, trial enrichment, and so forth, but what if you can use artificial intelligence to actually reduce the cost of trials by, 50%, 25%? What if you can reduce a trial cost to a tenth of what it would have been without artificial intelligence in an area such as, neurology or psychiatry or diabetes and so forth? Now you're talking about potentially creating business models around product development that are faster, are far, far cheaper, and potentially far more profitable for somebody developing these products in these spaces. So I think this is where artificial intelligence can really make a huge difference. Now, it's not as simple as just building some models. We're going to need novel biomarkers, which potentially artificial intelligence can be used to discover, some novel clinical trial endpoints. And if you look at the FDA website, they're all over it. There are papers on the FDA website providing industry some guidance in terms of how artificial intelligence can be used to accelerate clinical trial times and reduce overall costs. So I think this is where artificial intelligence could really, really make a huge difference in our industry. But there are challenges. Look, not all AI models or companies are the same. If you have 3 AI service providers and you give all 3 of them the exact same project, you're going to get 3 different results. Which is fine. There is uncertainty in science. But we all have to recognize that even with AI, there is going to be some failure. Now, if you're an AI service provider, You're in an interesting place. Are you a service model where you're like a contract research organization? You provide a service. Are you morphing into a drug discovery, quote unquote, biotech, where perhaps you're using your AI to discover novel compounds or novel candidates on paper, which you want to synthesize and test in animal models, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Or are you some combination of both? Are you morphing from one to another? It's a potentially interesting business model. Some companies are doing it well, some are not. So we'll have to see how that all goes. Another interesting point regarding artificial intelligence is if a computer, if a model proposes the synthesis of a novel compound, the question then is who or what discovered that candidate. The lawyers are jumping up and down, suggesting that patent law is not keeping up with artificial intelligence because patent law assumes that the inventors are human. I'm not necessarily in agreement that this is a huge issue, but apparently the lawyers do. We'll have to see how this all shakes out. But look around. There are a couple of articles suggesting that AI is a big problem from a patent point of view. I don't necessarily agree that's the case, but there we are. So predictions. What's going to happen next year? Let me start with the easiest prediction ever proposed, which is that there are a lot of blockbusters facing loss of exclusivity. And look, some of these are massive. Humira, Xeljanz. I remember when Xeljanz was in phase 2. Some of these products you're talking about, 30, 40+% of company revenue, which is amazing. But having said that, these are companies with a lot of cash on their balance sheets. Their cost of capital is essentially zero. They can borrow money at a moment's notice. So what's going to happen? I think this points towards a lot of M&A, which I don't think is a good thing for our industry. When you have M&A, you have programs that are shelved, you have jobs that are lost, you have fewer companies out there licensing products. It's just not a good thing. We need more companies with strong balance sheets, not fewer of them. Now, I know the bankers are going to disagree with me, but I don't think this is necessarily a good situation. I think blockbusters losing exclusivity is a perfectly good situation if it helps keep costs down. Nothing wrong with that. That's how our industry works. But if it comes at the expense of fewer companies in the ecosystem, that to me is the bigger problem. COVID. I guess I need to make some comments about COVID. I'm in the northeastern U.S. We're entering the winter season. We're entering the season of what people are now calling the triple-demic of COVID, influenza, and RSV, as if it's somehow a shock that we're seeing increased cases of influenza and RSV in December in the northeastern U.S. My goodness. So what's my prediction? I think we're going to see more COVID-era recommendations from governments with less compliance. I think we are going to see governments say, yes, you should be wearing a mask when you go to the grocery store. You're going to see more people wearing masks at the grocery store. Are we going to see 90% compliance in the grocery store? No. I mean, I seriously doubt it. I think most of us who are watching this video are probably sick of COVID. And, if you're well vaccinated and otherwise healthy, chances are you have, very little to be concerned about when it comes to some of these. I think we are going to see more and more back to office mandates. I don't know what percentage of workers are working from home these days. Obviously during the lockdowns, it was close to 100%. I'm not sure what the numbers are these days. I suspect we're going to see more of them, but companies are going to need to balance. If there are some workers that are affected from home, and if rental expenses can be reduced, it's not necessarily a bad thing. So I think we'll see more of them. Whether we're going to get back to I don't see a day where we're going to get back to 100% in office working. I think those days are largely behind us. From a business development point of view, I think we're going to go back, like I said earlier, to sort of 2019-ish time frame. The tourist investors are largely out of biotech. I think deal volumes are going to return to 2018, 2019 levels, which again, I don't think is a bad thing. I think we're going to see continued concentration in some of these areas, but there will be an expense. Again, I'm not going to belabor the point. I do think we're going to see companies that will be acquired or merge at relatively low valuations. And let me end with some comments on sort of the geopolitical situation. I don't know who said this. It wasn't me. I wish I could take credit for this one, but somebody somewhere along the way said, politicians never fail to disappoint. I think actually this phrase came up. This came out of the UK during Brexit, and I think that can be applied to nearly everything. I'm not an expert in these things, but I do think from at least from what I've read, that the European war in Ukraine will continue through 2023. There's a danger of it expanding, but I don't think from what I've read that it's going to come to any swift conclusion early in 2023. I think we're going to continue to see more social media enabled protests and political instability. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think we have literally millions of people that are living in countries where governments are just suppressing just basic human rights and basic freedoms. And I think if for the cesspool that is social media, if social media can be used to create some instability and bring some awareness to what's happening in some of these countries, hey, so much the better. And that leads me to the final comment, which is the World Cup. It's coming to an end. The final is coming up this Sunday. The World Cup has brought some of these types of issues to light. Whether the World Cup will have a legacy and continue to bring some of these issues, keep these issues to the forefront, we'll just have to see. But I think overall, geopolitically, macroeconomically, 2023 I think is still going to be a bit of a bumpy ride, but I think our industry is in relatively good shape. I think, like I said earlier, we're going to see some instability. We're going to see some M&A, so it's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride, I think, in 2023. But regardless, I don't think it's going to be a boring year. So hopefully you have enjoyed watching this video. Thank you for sticking around to the bitter end. I wish all of you a very safe and happy holiday, and we'll see all of you in 2023. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.